Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live on this Thursday afternoon. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Thanks for being here with us. It's nice to spend a summer afternoon with you. Maybe we're spending a summer evening with you, or even a summer, I guess it could be a winter morning or a summer morning, depending on if you're northern or southern hemisphere. But wherever you are, we're just awful glad you're here. Jimmy's with us here both hours. Jimmy Akin, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of, I got two of his books right here, so I'll just tell you these two. A Daily Defense, 365 Days plus one to Becoming a Better Apologist. And then this one over here, the Bible is a Catholic book. Also, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, Jimmy Akin, hello.
Hello, Cy Kellett. How are you doing?
I am very well. Thank you very, very much. How's things at 5 p.m. where you are instead of 3 p.m.?
It's a lot like 3 p.m., only it's 2 hours later.
You're very good with time, Jimmy. You're very good with time.
Some have speculated there's a reason for that.
Because you are a potential time traveler from the future?
Well, being a master of time, some have speculated I might be a time lord.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, I have not seen you in close proximity to a red phone booth, but that doesn't mean you don't have one.
True, or a blue phone booth, or whatever it might be.
Wait, did I get the color wrong on that one?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
However, my sister has described my house as a TARDIS house because it doesn't look that big from the street, but when you get inside it, it's much bigger on the inside. It's very deep. Yeah.
A perfect house for Jimmy Akin, a TARDIS house. 888-318-7884 is the number. What's dropping tomorrow on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
We're going to be looking at Leo Taxil's Masonic Revelations. Leo Taxil was a Frenchman who was initially Catholic, but then he became a freethinker and a Freemason, and then he reverted to the Catholic Church and started writing exposés of Freemasons and had some really startling revelations to talk about.
All right. Looking forward to it. Check it out at Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. That's mysterious.fm. Or just type in Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. The number here, 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Thomas is call screening for us today because Jordan was going to be doing it, but we just found out like 2 minutes before the show that she's sick today. So Thomas, thanks for coming in.
Yeah. And that just illustrates how it can be necessary to improvise in live radio. For example, you never know what's going to happen. Someday you might have to improvise for a couple of minutes because conceivably I could have to step away. And since you've got one of my books right there,
yes,
A Daily Defense with little one-page entries, you could always impose by opening it to a random page and reading the page.
I could do that.
Which would also give a preview of one of our other podcasts, A Daily Defense podcast, where I do exactly that.
Which is available now. But now I'm not sure. Am I about to have to improvise? I'm all excited.
Know.
Well, I hope it'll happen.
Who can say what the future holds?
Well, you can. You have a TARDIS.
Maybe.
That's right. I forgot we don't publicly talk about the fact that you are a Time Lord. The number again, 888-318-7884. Thomas has already screened calls. Ryan, thanks for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hey, Jimmy, I wanted to ask you, back in June of this year, I got to attend a Dominican Rite sung mass, and I was wondering while I was watching, how is it that other rites in the Roman Rite, like the Dominicans, the Ambrosians, and etc., come to be? Were they using enculturation, or how did they make themselves different?
Well, they weren't using enculturation in the modern sense, which is where you have a standardized, version of the Roman Rite, and then it gets implemented a little bit differently in different cultural contexts. Instead, there was no standardized Roman Rite. There were, as the Christian faith spread in Western Europe, they carried versions of the Mass with them, but there was no single standardized version, and so it was adapted in different places, and that eventually, and at different times, and that gave us the different versions of the Roman Rite of the Church, including the Dominican Rite that's used in the Dominican order, the Ambrosian Rite that's used in Milan, where St. Ambrose was bishop, the Sarum Rite that was used in England, and so forth. And then, after the time of the Protestant Reformation, Pope Pius V decided to impose a substantial but not total degree of unity within the Latin Rite, and he issued a bull called Quo Primum, in which he mandated that everybody follow the version of the Mass as it was used in Rome, except for those who had a version of the Mass that was 200 or more years old. And so the Dominicans had a version that was more than 200 years old, so they got to keep theirs. The Ambrosians, the Milanese, I should say, had a version that was more than 200 years old, so they got to keep theirs, and so forth. So it wasn't modern enculturation where you start with a unified standard and adapt it. Instead, it was an environment of free adaptation that eventually got largely standardized.
Okay, Ryan?
Yeah, do you mind if I add one more thing just really quick?
No, go ahead. Thanks, Ryan.
Okay, I recently observed through various conversations on Facebook that the Sarum Rite that you mentioned, Jimmy, is starting to become really popular, and I noticed that Orthodox and Anglican priests seem to celebrate it. And how do you think that can be if that's, properly speaking, a Catholic rite and not Protestant or Orthodox?
Well, now I'm not aware of the Sarum Rite still being in use in the Catholic Church today, but just because something is published by Catholics, that doesn't mean only Catholics buy it or use it. So there are a variety of different rites of the Mass that have been used historically, and even if they're not authorized for use today in the Catholic Church, that doesn't stop an Anglican priest or an Orthodox priest or anybody from picking up a copy of it and trying to implement it in practice.
Ryan, thank you. Thanks very much for getting us started. All lines full now, so there's one line open, 888-318-7884, the number. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's open forum. We go to Ohio now. Liam in Ohio is listening on the Catholic Answers app. Liam, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Sure, thank you. My question regards the Israelites asking for a king in 1 Samuel. And the way I read it, it's almost like the elders are being humble and saying that they're not good enough for the system of government that God appointed for them with the judges. And it seems that things are so chaotic and violent prior to them asking for a king that, honestly, it sounds very reasonable that they would want a little bit more law and order. I was hoping you could help explain why this offends God.
Well, I don't know that from an ultimate perspective that it does fulfill offend God, because the Catholic Church has long recognized there are different forms of government that are acceptable from an ultimate divine perspective, and monarchy is one of them, but so are democracy and oligarchy and other variations. So it's possible to have different forms of government, and as long as they're governing effectively with the consent of the governed, it doesn't offend God in principle. Having said that, there can be special circumstances where attempting to impose a new form of government could offend God. For example, suppose you're here in America, which has been constituted as a democratic republic, and you said, I don't like the way this democratic republic is functioning. Let's overthrow it violently and institute a monarchy. Well, God doesn't have a problem with monarchy in principle, but he does have a problem with violent overthrows of government that are not strictly necessary. And so even though he wouldn't have a problem with a monarchy in particular, there are lots of Christian monarchies, he would have a problem with violently overthrowing a government contrary to the will of the people and imposing a new regime on it. So there can be local circumstances, particular historical circumstances, where something is contrary to the will of God. And at least from one perspective, that applies to ancient Israel at the time of the United Monarchy, at the time it was instituted. Now, if you read the Old Testament, different texts provide different perspectives on the monarchy. There are some that are negative, like when it's being instituted, but there are others that are fine with the monarchy. You know, David even becomes the prototype of the Messiah. So we see a divergence of perspective. We see there are different ways of looking at the monarchy, even in the Old Testament itself. And that suggests that what we're looking at here is a complex truth. And because it's a complex truth, it can be looked at from different perspectives, and they represent different aspects of God's thought on the subject. We shouldn't look at one passage as if it were a complete and total representation of God's thought, because there are different legitimate perspectives. In terms of the specific passage you're mentioning in 1 Samuel, what's happened is God has given the Israelites the land, and they're functioning as a tribal confederation. And then whenever a need arises, God will provide them with a charismatic warlord, a judge, to defend them against their enemies. And the judges were, not an ongoing reality. It's not like there was a single judge ruling all of Israel all the time. They were occasional needs. And so from this perspective, the judges were not per se the ruler. Instead, God was the ruler, and he provided judges as his agents to deal with particular historical situations. But, this was a somewhat unstable situation, and the Israelites wanted a more permanent solution. And other nations had kings, which in the ancient Near Eastern context meant strongmen, who were rulers, who were what we would now call an absolute monarch, as opposed to, for example, like the constitutional monarchies we see in various places today. Like Britain, we have King Charles now, but he's not an absolute ruler. He's in a constitutional monarchy where the powers of the monarch are circumscribed by the constitution of the nation. And so he has only limited powers, whereas in an absolute monarchy, the monarch has much, much stronger powers. And in various emergency circumstances, in particular, you could need a monarch who was unfettered in what he could do and just say, this is what we're going to do, without really having to defer to other people or to precedent or things like that. And that's one reason that historically, some absolute monarchies have performed very well. Others have performed disastrously, because if you have an absolute monarchy, whether it works or not really goes down to the quality of the individual monarch you got. If you got a bad monarch, he's going to totally mismanage things. If you got a good monarch, he can do a lot of good. And so whoever is the ultimate decider, to borrow a phrase from George Bush, whoever is the ultimate decider in a monarchy, whether it's absolute or constitutional, is not God. God is no longer the monarch. He's not ruling directly. He's not the permanent ruler on an ongoing basis. Instead, the human monarch is. And so that's why at the beginning of 1 Samuel, God tells Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Because Samuel is one of the judges, so he was God's agent. And God says, look, don't take it personally. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And that is an aspect of the truth. The Israelites were rejecting the system of governance that God had set up for them, and that does imply a rejection of God as monarch, particularly given that they're rejecting his agents and asking for a permanent ongoing human king instead. However, that's not to say that God can't work with that system, and God ultimately consented and allowed, for example, Saul to become king, and then Saul's son, and then David, and then David's descendants. He also worked with it after the division between the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes, where he instituted a parallel monarchy in the nation of Israel and promised to bless it as long as they stuck with him as God, which they didn't end up doing. So things didn't go well for them. But we see how in this situation there is an aspect of it in which the Israelites are rejecting what God has set up for them and thus is rejecting their rule. But that doesn't mean God can't work with the monarchy and can't bring about good through it as well.
And Liam, I'm going to leave it there because we need to go to our first break. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is our guest. Right back with more of that after this on Catholic Answers Live.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the reasons we should go to Mass is because it is the food of the saints that we receive. And for the saints, they understood rightly that the time after Holy Communion, that those moments are the most precious moments of our lives.
The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, live from the EWTN Chapel, every morning, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Open forum. You can ask anything you'd like. 888-318-7884. The number 888-318-7884. And we head right up the road from us here in Southern California. Dan's in Laguna Beach, listening on the Catholic Answers app. Dan, thanks for downloading the app onto your phone. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, Jimmy and Cy.
Hi, Dan.
I have an interesting moral question. The California Constitution recently added an amendment that gave the right to abortion, I guess, permanently within that Constitution. I'm on a governmental board that has nothing to do with social issues at all. I mean, we do things like provide water systems and sewage systems and fire protection, that sort of thing. I'm on that board. But when my term renews, I'm going to have to swear allegiance to the California Constitution to defend it and do all of this without mental reservation. So how can I, as a pro-life Catholic, remain on that board even though it has nothing to do with abortion? How can I do it and basically deal with this moral issue?
Okay, so I'm going to recommend for you the same thing I recommend for anybody anytime a moral question calls up the issue of can they continue in a particular job. Because what you really need in this situation is more than just a radio answer given on limited information. Like I can't, for example, right now see the words that you're actually required to say as part of the oath. And so I can't really offer any kind of firm opinion on this. So what I do in these situations is I recommend that people contact the National Catholic Bioethics Center, which has a staff of moral experts who can review a question and do it in detail in a considered way that there can then give you an expert opinion on. And they're Orthodox theologians. There are differences of opinion among even Orthodox theologians, but they can give you a better opinion than what I can do based on the extremely limited information that I have here. So I would say contact the National Catholic Bioethics Center and ask for a consultation. You can explain the situation to them. You can show them the actual text of the oath you're required to swear, and they can investigate it and give you an opinion. Now, having said that, I can offer you a few thoughts. This is not a formal opinion because I don't have the data I would need to give you a formal opinion. But it seems to me that when such oaths are made, what you're swearing is what you're going to do in your capacity as a government person. So in this case, as a member of a government board of directors. You're not talking about what you do as a private citizen. So as a private citizen, you would still be able to vote against abortion. You would still be able to do pro-life activism. It's just not in your governmental capacity that you would be doing that. And since your governmental capacity has, as you've said, nothing to do with abortion, you wouldn't ever be required as a government agent or as a government official to support abortion in any way. So effectively, you would be saying, in my governmental capacity, I will uphold the state constitution. But that doesn't mean that as a private citizen, I can't vote to change the government constitution or advocate its changing. I just need to do it when I'm off the clock. And so it seems to me that there is a possible resolution there. But like I said, where you wouldn't either have to violate your oath or violate your conscience. But for a professional opinion on that, that's actually informed, I would say call the National Catholic Bioethics Center and ask for a consultation. And I also want to mention, I very much sympathize with your situation, because certainly when it comes to abortion, California is evil. And I am so proud of my home state of Arkansas, where I now live, because it was the very first one after Roe v. Wade fell to announce abortion is illegal here. You know, just as soon as the Dobbs decision came out, the governor and the Secretary of State were appearing on TV saying, our trigger law is hereby triggered and abortion is illegal in Arkansas. We're saving those babies. So I'm very proud of that, and I very much sympathize with your situation. It does make it harder for Catholics to work, faithful Catholics, to work in government in California, but we actually need them there. It's better to have a government of Catholics who are with Catholics in it, even if they're hampered in how effective they can be. It's still important to have them there so that the field isn't left totally open to the enemies of life.
Dan, thank you very, very much for the call, for the question. I hope it was helpful, and I hope you will contact the Bioethics Center for further help.
Yeah. Their website, by the way, is ncbcenter.org. That's NCB for National Catholic Bioethics, ncbcenter.org.
Let's go to Ontario. Justin is in Ontario watching on YouTube. Justin, glad to have you. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, guys. How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
It's good to talk to you guys again. Recently, I was studying Matthew 16 with Peter's ability with the keys and the binding and loosing, and it's singular. It's only for Peter, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, in Matthew 16.
Yep, and then when you get to Matthew 18, all the other apostles, they're not given the keys, but they are given the ability to bind and loose. Mm-hmm. But as I was looking at it, it is the plural version of you, so yep. You all or you guys. But it basically says to bind and loose wherever, you need 2 or 3 in my name. So I was thinking about that in light of bishops, and I thought, okay, the bishops are the successors of the apostles. How come in a diocese we don't have 2 or 3 bishops? How come one man has all episcopal power? And how does that not kind of, how does that work with Matthew 18? It seems to be not working. And I have one more follow-up question. Might this be evidence with the debate between, were priests and bishops the same in the beginning and then later on it changed? Might this be evidence that priests and bishops were the same?
I don't see any evidence here that priests and bishops were the same or were not the same. I don't think that these passages address that question. These passages are dealing with the apostles, who were neither priests nor bishops. The office of apostle includes all of the functions of priests and bishops, but it goes beyond them as well. So bishops are not the successors of the apostles in the sense that they're just apostles with another name. There is a difference between the office of bishop and the office of apostle. And as a result, I don't think that this passage or these passages, Matthew 16 and Matthew 18, I don't think that they have anything to do with the issue of how did the episcopacy develop in relation to the priesthood. In terms of what they do tell us, well, they're talking about how the apostles can function, but that doesn't mean we can just read out of that how bishops can function, because number one, Scripture is not complete. It doesn't give us everything you need to know about running a church. And so there are a lot of issues that Scripture simply doesn't address, including the ability of bishops to make laws for their subjects. You mentioned you said that we have only one bishop in each diocese. Well, that's not always true. There are a lot of dioceses that have assistant bishops and coadjutor bishops and so forth. So it's not strictly true that it's always one bishop per diocese. In fact, in Rome, even though the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, they got a lot of bishops and archbishops over there. So we have to, in looking at Matthew 16, we have to be aware that it's not strictly applicable to bishops directly, and it's not complete in describing. These two passages are not a complete description of everything bishops can do. So with those qualifications in mind, what Matthew 16 does is it shows us that there is one apostle, Peter, who can exercise the power to bind and loose unilaterally. But there's more to say, and we'll say it on the other side of the break.
Please hang on, Justin, and we'll do that. It's open forum today. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and you are welcome to call 888-318-7884.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers monthly giving club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Totally forgot about the groovy music. That's a nice little surprise. Thanks, Darren. That means it's Thursday. It's open forum. Jimmy Akin is here, and you are welcome to call 888-318-7884. Justin in Ontario is on the line asking about the binding and loosing authority granted to. You were discussing about whether it was granted, who it was granted to, Jimmy, in the gospel.
So in Matthew 16, Jesus grants the authority to Peter, and it is clear from the pronoun that Jesus uses. He's talking just to Peter. He's not talking to the disciples as a group. And what that indicates to us is that there is one apostle who can unilaterally bind and loose by his own authority without having to do so in consultation with other apostles. When Jesus then addresses a similar statement to the rest of the apostles without the power of the keys, but nevertheless mentioning binding and loosing, he uses the plural pronoun, y'all, whatever y'all bind and whatever y'all loose. So this passage indicates that apostles could collectively or collegially exercise the power to bind and loose. And Jesus mentions them doing that in twos or threes. Wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered in my name, you can do this. And so that's a positive statement of what they can do as a group of 2 or more. And it could be all the way up to all of them, but at least 2 or 3. Well, that's what applies to apostles, but we don't have apostles today. So how does it apply to bishops? Well, the church has had 2,000 years to think about this, and what it's discerned is that today bishops can exercise the power to bind and loose, which is effectively the power to make or modify laws. They can make laws or bind and loose for their subjects and they can do that individually. So the Pope is a bishop who has all of the Catholic faithful as his subjects. So he can make or modify laws for everybody in the Catholic world, everybody who's a Catholic. And he can do that individually, which is why the Pope is the one who promulgates the Code of Canon Law. And that's known because it applies to everybody in the church. It's known as universal law. But universal law isn't the only kind of law that exists. There's also what's known as particular law. And particular law is laws that are not universal. Something's a particular law if it only applies to, for example, a given diocese or a given territory, like, say, the dioceses of the United States. And whoever's in charge of those gets to make the law for them. So an individual bishop can make law for his subjects. And so if he's the bishop of some diocese, let's say in the United States, he can make laws for his diocese that will be particular law for those dioceses. But what if you want to make a law that applies to all the Catholics in the United States? Well, it's going to be particular law because it doesn't apply to the whole world. Who would do it? Well, the competent body would be the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. And so the National Conference of Catholic Bishops can make particular law that applies collectively to their subjects, meaning all of the Catholics in the United States. And that reflects a collegial use of the power of the keys. So that's what the present state of affairs is. Individual bishops can make laws for their subjects, and since the Pope has everybody as his subjects, he can make laws for everybody, or universal law. And individual bishops can make laws for their subjects in their diocese, or they can make law in a collegial manner so that it applies to all of the different dioceses in their territory. And this is based on the principles that we find operating in the Apostolic College, the Pope being the bishop who's the successor of Peter, and the bishops in general being successors of the apostles. It relies on the same principles that are articulated in Matthew 16 and Matthew 18, but it covers situations that aren't envisioned in
Oh, we got a little bit of technical problem. It covers situations that aren't envisioned, but we don't know what the conclusion of that statement is. So that's all right. We'll reconnect with Jimmy. While we're reconnected with Jimmy, I do want to invite you again. We have been inviting you, and I want to invite you again. Oh, Jimmy, I'm so sorry.
No problem.
We didn't have you for a second. And
yeah, y'all froze up on me, and then I'm told I froze up on you. So we mutually froze each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you know where you froze or where we froze?
No, but I can approximate. So, so what this shows us is that the same principles are in operation both in the Gospel of Matthew and in the Episcopal College today. But after 2,000 years of thinking about it, we fleshed out these principles and applied them to new situations that aren't addressed in Matthew. Like, what could an individual apostle who's not Peter do? Well, if you have, for example, a lone apostle in some territory, like let's say Paul in some territory, he's founded some church somewhere, Paul could probably make particular law for that church as long as he's there and running the show in that location. Paul could make law for that community without having to pull in other apostles. And so the collective use is there in the New Testament. The individual use by an apostle other than Peter is not mentioned in the New Testament, but it's not mentioned one way or the other. So it's also not precluded. And as a result of a couple of thousand years of thinking about it, the church realized, okay, it makes sense for bishops who are the sole authority in their area to be able to make laws for their area.
And I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you very, very much for the call, Justin. But that every single line full. So on we go. Sue is in Tracy, Minnesota, watching on YouTube. Sue, thank you for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Thank you. I am discerning coming into the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
I've been through RCIA, listening to the Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, and my question for you is on the validity of my baptism.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised Baptist, and my question is, because the intent was not to save, I perfectly recall meeting with the deacons when I was 9 years old and them asking me if I had accepted Christ as my personal Savior.
Mm-hmm.
And I seem to remember that it was in the Trinitarian, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But I was given no certificate of baptism. And when I called the church, they did not have any record of it. I'm 56 years old, so that was like in 1977.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a double question. Is it valid if the intent was not the same? Like a sacramental, the intent was not the same as it is in the Catholic faith or other faiths.
Okay.
And then the fact that I do not have proof.
Okay, so let's deal with the second question first. The fact that you don't have a baptismal document from your church and that they're not able to provide one is not itself a barrier here. It is possible to talk to people who were aware of the baptism at the time. You can testify to this yourself. Maybe you have a relative or a friend who knew about the baptism at the time it occurred, and they could also give testimony that, yes, this did happen. And so it would be possible to certify the fact that you were baptized through witness testimony rather than through a document that comes from your former church. So that's a possibility. In terms of the validity question, it is the common standard opinion is that the sacraments are performed validly as long as the person intends to do what the church does, even if they don't understand all of the implications of that. So in a Baptist context, they are intending to do what the church does. They are intending to perform this rite that Jesus Christ said we ought to perform. So that's their intent. That thing that Jesus said we need to do, Jesus commanded. And so the standard opinion would be that your baptism was valid. Now, what about the gray zones here? Because it may not be possible to produce witnesses or things like that. All you got to do to take care of any lingering issues is just ask for a conditional baptism, which is one where they administer the rite, but they modify the wording so that it's like, if you are not already baptized, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So that way, if you were baptized validly in the past, that took care of it. And if you weren't baptized validly in the past, then you're going to be baptized now. And there's still only one baptism you're receiving, whether it was back then or now, because of the way the formula is phrased now. If you're not yet baptized, I now baptize you. And so it used to be customary when receiving a convert to automatically give them a conditional baptism. That's not always done now, but it is done sometimes, particularly if there is a case of doubt. And when I became Catholic, I insisted on a conditional baptism, and you could similarly insist as well and say, I just in case of any doubts, I want to do this, and I'll feel more secure that way.
Sue, how does that sit with you?
Well, that answered my question. I have lots of questions, but just that one for today. So
Awesome.
Well, I'll tell you
was
what, Sue, I'll send you a couple books if you'd like. Jimmy wrote a book called The Words of Eternal Life. The Words of Eternal Life, True Happiness and Where to Find It. I'd love to send you that book. And then we have a book from Trent Horn called Why We're Catholic. If you would like those books, just hang on the line. We'll send them off to you. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. Be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
In Morse code, the sequence SOS is a distress call. It's been said that it stands for Save Our Souls. Well, right now our world is in big trouble, and we're putting out an SOS call for help. Will you answer that call? St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, has hundreds of teams who share the good news with souls who don't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to get involved.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Williams, inviting you to Birmingham for the free EWTN Family Celebration. It's Saturday, August 26th. Enjoy talks from your favorite EWTN radio and TV hosts, including me. You can shop at EWTN's religious catalog, attend Holy Mass, and be part of a televised show. There's even a Eucharistic procession through the streets of Birmingham. Go to EWTN.com/family celebration to find out more and to register. I look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. It's Open Forum. Jimmy Akin, our guest. The number 888-318-7884. But you don't have to call if you can come in. And Penelope, a good friend of Catholic Answers. Penelope, often at our conference. You've gone on pilgrimages and cruises with us, and we're delighted that you're here. Thanks for coming in today.
It's my pleasure.
How long have you been a friend of Catholic Answers?
I'm a Catholic Answers convert.
Oh, you are?
Absolutely. I came to a gala, I think, in 2012, and I've been coming to the conferences since they started.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And today, you came in to take a tour and everything, but you have a question for Jimmy.
I do, because as a convert, there are aspects of Catholicism that are always new and interesting to me. I was in a discussion about the Assumption, which we just celebrated this week, and someone told me about an early church tradition that Mary died just 2 years after Jesus, that she lived in Jerusalem in St. John's house and prayed at the site of the crucifixion every day. And of course, there is the tomb of Mary, which is empty, of course, in Jerusalem. But I had always heard that Mary lived in Ephesus, and I imagined that she lived longer. So I was just wondering if Jimmy had any information about that other early church tradition.
Well, I'm aware of the two traditions. In fact, I've been to both of the so-called houses of Mary. The one in Jerusalem is on the Mount of Olives, and so it's across from the temple complex, and I've been there. I've also been to the so-called House of Mary in Ephesus, in Turkey, which in both of these cases, I think I think we can't put too much weight on the traditions because connected with them, because in the case of the Jerusalem tradition, while it does show up, it's not super early. And, it's not like we have a 2nd century document that says this. And similarly, in the case of the Ephesus tradition, it's also not super early. We don't have a 2nd century document that says this. If we had one from that period, I could have more confidence in its historical accuracy. But when you're talking about a gap of hundreds of years between when the event would have occurred and when the tradition is first preserved, there's too much space in there to have a lot of confidence that it's accurately preserving details. So my inclination is to be respectful of these two traditions, but not to put a huge amount of confidence in them. What can I say? about these circumstances? Well, we're told in the Gospel of John that the beloved disciple took Jesus's mother to his own. And so that means he cared for her after Jesus's crucifixion. And we would then have a question of, so, okay, where did the beloved disciple live? Well, if he's John the Apostle, he would have initially lived in Galilee, and it's possible that he could have returned there and taken Mary there. In fact, we see Peter going back to Galilee in John's Gospel and doing some fishing. So, well, John the Apostle, he was a fisherman too. He might have gone back to Galilee for a while and engaged in his livelihood, and he might have taken Mary there. On the other hand, there is an alternative theory that I actually think is a lot better supported than a lot of people realize, that says that John, the author of John's Gospel, is the beloved disciple, and he is a guy named John, but he's not John the Apostle. Instead, he's a figure referred to in various church fathers as John the Elder. So he was an elderly figure that is responsible for some or all of the Johannine books in the New Testament. And this was the opinion, for example, of St. Jerome. And also it was the opinion of the Council of Rome in 382 that identified in particular 2nd and 3rd John as the work of John the Elder rather than John the Apostle, because they are even addressed from the elder to the elect lady and from the elder to Gaius. And so various people have taken that as evidence, including Pope Benedict, that they were written by John the Elder. So what do we know about John the Elder? Well, according to if he is the beloved disciple, it would seem that he was a native of Jerusalem. And there are a couple of reasons I mentioned that. One is he shows up in Jerusalem. He's not in John's Gospel. There's almost none of John's Gospel that's set in Galilee. Instead, it focuses not exclusively, but almost exclusively on events in and around Jerusalem. And those are the places where the beloved disciple shows up. So at least almost all the time. And so it looks like he may have been an inhabitant of Jerusalem. And he's sometimes therefore called John of Jerusalem. The other factor that leads in this direction is he is personally known by the high priest Caiaphas. When Jesus is arrested, he goes to the household of the high priest Caiaphas, and it tells us that they knew who he was. And the maid who is guarding the door, the doorkeeper, she just lets him in because she already knows who he is. And John has to intervene to get Peter access to the high priest's house. So he's already known. And this would be very unlikely for a low-class Galilean fisherman, but it would be much more likely for a member of the Jerusalem elite to have been over to the high priest's house so many times that the staff of the high priest can recognize him at night and know it's okay to let him in. So I think if the beloved disciple is John of Jerusalem or John the Elder, then he probably would have stayed in Jerusalem and had Mary with him in his house for a substantial period of time. And so I think that would be a likely scenario. I don't think we could say from that she therefore went to the site of the crucifixion every day to pray, but it is likely that she would have lived in John's house in Jerusalem for at least some period of time. But what about later? Well, okay, you mentioned one idea that she died 2 years after the crucifixion. I can't rule that out, but I also don't think it's the most probable scenario. The reason I say that is the New Testament nowhere mentions Mary's death. Now, it's possible that she died during shortly after Jesus' crucifixion, and it's just never mentioned, because none of the books of the New Testament are talking about that. But Acts is a history of the early church, and Mary does appear in Acts, and she's very important to Luke. In fact, the Gospel of Luke indicates on 2 occasions that Luke derived his information from Mary. So Mary is one of Luke's sources. He presumably met her, and it looks like he did his research for the Gospel of Luke and for Acts, it looks like those two books were written about AD 59 and AD 60. And that's quite a bit after Jesus was crucified in AD 33. Now, we don't know exactly when he did his research, but that's at least an indication she may have died after the Gospel and Acts were written. And so I would be skeptical of the 2 years claim. I would think if it really was that early, when the church was still centered in Jerusalem itself, I think Luke would have been at least somewhat likely to mention it, and he doesn't. So she may well have survived later until the Christian community and its leaders started moving out of Jerusalem. And that's where Ephesus comes in. There is a tradition connecting not only John the Apostle, but also John the Elder to Ephesus. And you have various early Christian authors talking about how there are the tombs of two Johns in Ephesus, and both John the Apostle and John the Elder are reported to be buried there. And I've actually visited one of their tombs. I'm less confident of the so-called Mary's house in Ephesus because it was identified based on private revelation, and private revelation is not meant to satisfy curiosities about what exact house did Mary live in. It's meant to teach us about Jesus and teach us spiritual lessons. It's like Pope Benedict XIV pointed out, you know, when you have some visionaries seeing Christ crucified with 3 nails and some see him being crucified with 4 nails, the purpose of private revelation is not to satisfy our curiosity about how many nails it was. It was to teach us about the crucifixion. And in the same way, private revelations about Mary aren't meant to answer curiosity questions about what exact house did she live in. It's meant to teach us spiritual lessons. So I'm less confident of that. But if Mary did live longer, then I would give some credence to the idea that she relocated to Ephesus with whichever of the Johns was her caretaker, and that's a plausible scenario to me. So that's what I can reconstruct based on historical evidence. None of it's certain, but that's where the historical evidence would point to me those two options.
Wow, so much more than I expected to learn. Thank you, Jimmy.
Yeah, well, thank you, Penelope. It's really nice of you to come in, and we'll see you at the conference.
Absolutely, wouldn't miss it.
All right, very, very good. And well, we do these Friday night talks too, and we got one tomorrow night.
I'll be there.
Is it a good speaker? I don't know if it's a good.
I've heard it's one of the best.
Oh, thank you so much. Because I'm talking over at St. Therese of Carmel Parish here in San Diego, and you are invited to come. And everything starts around 6:30. There's all kinds of good stuff to eat, so come on over. Penelope, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
I just got to say a quick congratulations to our longtime member of the EWTN radio family, Prince of
Radio
Peace.
family. Cool.
Did I say family? Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, Darren's like, yeah, you sure did. Radio Family, Prince of Peace Radio in Palm City and Stuart, Florida. They're celebrating their 16th year with EWTN. Congratulations to Hans Krug and his team at WJPP from all of us at Catholic Answers and the broader EWTN family. It's open forum this hour. Jimmy Akin is our guest. There are a lot of folks on the line, but we're going to take a very quick break, and so a good time for you to dial. There's usually a line or two open when we take that break. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. And if you want to come to that conference we were just talking about with Penelope, our good friend, that, of course, is September 21st through 24th right here in sunny San Diego. Scott Hahn's going to be there, Dale Ahlquist, Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour, Trent Horn, Tim Staples, Carla Broussard, Joe Heschmeyer, and a whole bunch more. We'll do this radio program, and all the questions will come from live in the room. You can find out all about the conference by going to CatholicAnswersConference.com. If you're on the line, go ahead and hang on the line if you haven't dialed yet. 888-318-7884. In mere moments, we'll be back with more Jimmy Akin and the rest of our radio family while we do more Open Forum on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's open forum. You're welcome to call with whatever question you've got for Jimmy. 888-318-7884, 888-31-TRUTH. Jimmy, I want to say a special thank you for you to be here because I know this is your 5th hour of radio today. So
it is,
thanks.
yeah.
Yeah, we did some hours earlier for future airing, and you also get requests to do interviews, and so I know you were doing an interview with somebody.
This is a 5-hour radio day for me. Yep.
But you love doing radio, though. You're not one of those people who minds it.
No, I've done 4-hour live streams by myself.
Have you really?
No one else there.
Oh, like you do your Thanksgiving, your big Thanksgiving.
Christmas.
Oh, Christmas. That's when you do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you enjoy it. It's fun to do.
Yeah, it's fun. It's stimulating.
Well, good. We got a lot of fun and stimulating stuff to go. It's so funny to me that I said Framley before, and you and Darren heard it.
Framley.
Framley?
That's
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And it's funny because usually when you make an error like that, you hear it. I didn't hear it at all. Like, you guys actually surprised me when you said, you just said Framley. I didn't realize that I had done it. So, getting old. 888.
Uh-oh.
Ruh-roh. Ruh-roh. I need it. Oh, and we just took the break, and I didn't even get a Scooby snack from anybody after all that. I tell you what, also visiting the studio with our good friend Penelope is our friend Yolanda. And Yolanda got a text question from her nephew, Robert, from Woodstock, Canada. And he wanted me to ask you this question, Jimmy.
Okay.
Robert asks, can and should the filioque be removed now? Or is it still important to keep it?
Well, it's going to depend on the answer to the question, removed from what? And in Eastern Catholic rites that for example, use Greek as their language of the creed, not only should it be removed, but it has been removed. And the Vatican wanted it removed because the Greek didn't fully correspond, in part because the Greek, if I remember correctly, didn't fully correspond to the meaning in Latin. And this was a sensitive issue. It was causing friction, including between Catholics and, for example, Eastern Orthodox. And the Catholic Church is trying to promote Christian unity and hopefully eventual reconciliation with the Orthodox, and continuing to have something like that in liturgy that Eastern Catholics were saying would not foster that goal. And so during the reign of John Paul II, it was decided that this should be omitted from the creed when people are saying it in Greek.
Oh.
And so I think it's fine for it to be removed from that. Now, the question is, well, what about in other parts of the Latin Rite where the filioque, and we should explain what that is for people who may not know. Filius is Latin for son. Que is Latin for and. But unlike the word et, which also means and, et goes in front of the noun it modifies, and que goes afterwards. So filioque means and the son, even though they put the and after the word son. And this is a clause in the Nicene Creed where originally what the Nicene Creed said was that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. And then in the Middle Ages, in Latin contexts, they added and the Son. And this was not made in non-Latin speaking contexts, so it didn't get added. It wasn't a universal thing in the church that everybody was saying this. But it has been infallibly defined that this is true. So even though there are a lot of things that have been infallibly defined that we don't say as part of the creed. So it's definitely true, but you don't have to say it as part of the creed if you're in like a Greek Catholic church. And so the compromise was in Greek, it doesn't get said these days, but in Latin and languages that translate their liturgy from the Latin, so English, it does get said. And I don't think it would be good to remove it in those contexts. At least I can see a strong argument that it shouldn't be removed in those contexts, because what if you did remove it? What if you did take it out of the creed for everybody, it would cause a lot of confusion. Latin Catholics have been saying "and the Son" for centuries now. And you can imagine how this would get reported in the press. It would not get reported as Catholic Church de-emphasizes a teaching that is infallibly taught by no longer mentioning it in the creed. It would get reported as Catholic Church changes church teaching about the Holy Spirit. And that would cause a ton of confusion. So I think the compromise they've worked out, where it doesn't get said in various Eastern contexts, but it does get said in a Latin context, I think that actually works pretty well. It may not, there's still issues to work through as part of church reconciliation, but I think that it removes a stumbling block and still upholds the truth, the compromise that they've found.
Well, Robert, thank you for the question. And Yolanda, thank you very much for bringing it to us. We'll go now to Lindsay in Lincoln, Nebraska, listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Lindsay, thank you very much for the call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, good evening, gentlemen. My question is, if you have a friend or family member who is a confirmed Catholic but is deciding to get married, is a non-practicing Catholic anymore, fallen away, deciding to get married outside of the Catholic Church, is it acceptable to attend that wedding? And does your answer change if you are a parent or godparent and or the confirmation sponsor for that person?
Okay. So now I think there's a strong case that this law needs to be changed, but, and there are various scholars of canon law who would agree that there is a strong case this law needs to be changed. But the way the law is written now, everyone who has been baptized or received into the Catholic Church either needs to observe the Catholic form of marriage, which means getting married in a Catholic church effectively, or they need to be in some special situation, like having a dispensation from form so that they can get married in a different church. Or it's an emergency circumstance where they're stranded on an island and a priest is not going to be available for a month, and so they go ahead and get married on the island. There are exceptions. But unless those exceptions apply, the marriage is not going to be valid if it's between a Catholic and, for example, a Protestant or a non-Catholic. It's different if it's Eastern Orthodox. It actually, the marriage would be valid if they get married in an Eastern Orthodox church. They're not supposed to do that without a dispensation, but it would be valid. But if they're marrying a Protestant or a non-Christian, the way the law is written, the marriage would not be valid. And so that gets us to the question of, can you attend a marriage that you know is going to be invalid? Well, the code doesn't address this directly. What the code does say, though, is that Catholics need to maintain communion with the church, even in their own patterns of personal behavior. And it looks like, so effectively what that does is it kicks us into the realm of moral theology. And we need to ask the moral theological question, would this be moral to attend such a marriage, since the church doesn't have a direct rule about this? Well, if you show up at a marriage knowing it's going to be invalid and you don't say anything else, your presence is going to send the message that you think the marriage is valid. Otherwise, why would you be showing up? When you show up at a normal marriage, you're presuming these two people really are getting married. And so even if you don't say anything, just by being physically present at it, you could be unintentionally lying to the people and telling them you think their marriage is valid when really you don't think their marriage is valid. So a standard piece of advice would be not to attend such marriages. Now, there are then questions about, could you attend the marriage but let the bride and groom know that you don't think this is a valid marriage, but you're here out of respect and care for them? Well, the situation's muddier. Again, the church doesn't have a teaching on this or a rule about this. So we have to kind of do our best with moral theology to figure out what's the best thing to do in this situation. And there are going to be different opinions on that. Some individuals would say, well, you could, for purposes of maintaining family harmony or maintaining a relationship that you could later use if you're, say, their godparent to help bring them back to the church, you could go. On the other hand, you can argue that actually telling them you're not going and why would send a stronger message of, look, you need to take the church's teaching on this seriously. You either need to get married in the Catholic Church or you need to get a dispensation so you can get married in another church, or it's not going to be valid. And I'm going to be honest with you because I'm your godparent or your confirmation sponsor or whatever, and I want to be part of my job is to help you live the Christian faith. And if I just showed up at this, even kind of under protest, it would send the signal to you that this really isn't that important. Because otherwise, why am I here? If this is important, why am I here? And so I want to make sure you understand this is important. And so that's why, as much as I love you and care for you and want to help you out, that's why I can't attend this event. But, I'm always here to help you in any way that I can, and I hope that, I hope you're able to understand my position and that this doesn't put a barrier between us. So it's a tricky situation, but that's what I can tell you about the different options and opinions that people would have in this area.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Lindsay,
no problem.
Thank you very much for the call. That does bring us to the first break this hour. We'll take a break, right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
I'm Jeanette DeMello, Editor-in-Chief of the National Catholic Register and co-host of Register Radio with Matthew Bunson. Join us every week as we talk with the Register's expert writers and editors about the news you need to know and offer authentic Catholic insights on the important stories that impact your life. Register Radio, every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern and Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Global Catholic Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host, and we're having a lot of fun doing Open Forum. Jimmy Akin here. Lots of great calls for an August afternoon. You're welcome to bring your call if you've got a question. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Tomorrow on Jimmy's podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, which, by the way, is one of the most popular documentary podcasts in the world. Tomorrow it'll be the secrets of Masonry or Freemasonry. How do I say it?
Yep.
Freemasonry.
Either one. They mean the same thing.
Oh, all right. So check it out. I was going to say, nope, not JimmyAkin.com. There's a lot of good stuff there. But
you could go to JimmyAkin.com because we cross-post it there.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, well, there's a good little bit of information.
You can also go to my YouTube channel for the video version, which is youtube.com/JimmyAkin. And you could go to its homepage, mysterious.fm, just like FM radio, mysterious.fm. Or you could go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Stitcher or any of those things.
So if that's not enough options for you, I don't know. I just don't know if there's anything more we can do. Let's go up to Carlos in Canada. Listening on Catholic.com. That's our website, Catholic.com. Carlos, thanks for waiting. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Yes, thank you. So, Jimmy, I had a question regarding the self-defense that the Catholic Church teaches. I've heard many people say this means that citizens have like a right to bear arms because this is a great duty. But on the other hand, I see that Pope Francis and even the U.S. bishops have been calling for more gun control, which seems to go against that. So I'm unsure what's the right way here, or what's the church stance on this important issue, because they have even called it being a pro-life issue now, just the same as abortion, basically.
Okay.
Well, that's clearly not the case. I mean, self-defense does engage life issues, but that doesn't make it the same as abortion. Because if you're defending yourself as an aggressor, against an aggressor, then that's in a different category than attacking an innocent person where you're the aggressor. And so abortion involves attacking an innocent person, the unborn child, and that's aggression against the unborn child. Whereas defending yourself against someone who's attacking you is in a different moral category. It's not wrong to defend yourself. And the church acknowledges that, if it's a choice between your life and the life of the attacker, you can take human life in order to defend yourself or defend others. So even though they both may involve life issues, they are not the same life issue. In terms of parsing various statements, whether it's by bishops' conferences or popes, it's important to be aware that not everything that gets reported in a bishop's name or a pope's name is actually what they said. You frequently find misreporting going on in the media where it'll be kind of in the ballpark of what they said, but they've dropped out important qualifiers. Or even if it is exactly what they said, even if you have a direct quote with enough context to understand the meaning of the quote correctly, it doesn't mean it's a magisterial teaching. If the Pope says chocolate ice cream is the best, that doesn't make it a church teaching. So you, in addition to determining what was actually said, you have to look at what level of authority does it have? What level of authority has a member or members of the magisterium invested it with? And thus far, I am unaware of any statement by either the U.S. bishops or any other group of bishops or any of the recent popes, including Pope Francis, that addresses the question of, can you own a gun in order to protect yourself if you're in a dangerous environment? What I am aware of are some statements that are advisory rather than church teaching documents that condemn, for example, weapons trafficking. And yeah, sure, weapons trafficking is a serious issue, and we don't want weapons pouring into, various zones of the world where they're going to make the situation more dangerous and more unstable. So talking about weapons trafficking and arms control is one thing, but that's different than saying you are not able morally to own a gun or other weapon, like a knife, to defend yourself. And so I'm simply unaware of anything that addresses that issue one way or the other. And so I don't see these as fundamentally in opposition. Just like if you're at home and a home invader breaks in and is trying to kill you, and the only weapon you've got available is yourself. And if you can do that, then a gun is just a knife that works at a distance. It does the same thing. It punctures the other person. It just does so using a bullet that detaches from the gun. And so you can use it to defend yourself even more safely than using a knife to defend yourself. But there's no fundamental moral distinction. They're both deadly weapons. And if one of them is legitimate to use in self-defense, then the other is going to be legitimate to use in self-defense as well.
Carlos, does that address what you were thinking about?
Yes, just wanted to clarify that, yes, U.S. bishops have called for more gun control. And
okay, that's Carlos, that's ambiguous. Now, number one, I can't just take your word on that because I haven't seen the documents. I need to see the documents to assess what they say. You may have heard in the media that they have, quote unquote, called for more gun control, but that doesn't tell me that they've said it's immoral to own a gun to defend yourself. The gun control can take a bunch of different forms. And just because you hear a press account saying they have called for more gun control doesn't tell me what they've actually called for. There are a bunch of different ways of understanding that, including the arms trafficking, which I know they've addressed. I'm aware of where they've addressed arms trafficking, but that's not the same as private gun ownership for purposes of hunting or self-defense or target shooting. And so it also does not tell me that they've said this in a magisterial document as opposed to some other kind of document, because they issue lots of other kind of documents. Now, if you want to send me a primary source to look at, my email is jimmy@catholic.com, and I'm happy to look at the sources. But I can't let a statement just assuring us of this go unchallenged, because I don't know that to be the case. And I have a responsibility to the listening audience to let them know what the limits of my knowledge are. And I can't just accept it that something is the case that seems at variance with the history on this issue.
Carlos is going to leave it there because we do have full lines today. Thank you very much for the call and for the question. I'm going to go to an anonymous caller now in Oregon, watching on YouTube. Anonymous, welcome. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, guys. I just want to say thank you guys so much. I'm a Catholic convert myself, and you guys played a pretty big part in that. So thank you guys.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Absolutely. So I kind of have a crazy story, so I won't go long, but I need.
Well, you say that now.
I just need some guidance because, I come from a Protestant background, a Pentecostal type background, and really have saw the manifestations of the Holy Spirit really, and I come from that kind of perspective. So, but one thing's different. I'm a military veteran, and but I came home with a lot of problems like PTSD and severe anxiety disorders.
Oh no!
And so I was on medication pretty much my whole life, but I would also use cannabis. And this is something that I used probably since I was like 15 years old. And it's never did the things that everybody else happens to them. It just kind of just makes me feel like a normal person. And so as an adult now, I'm almost in my 40s, and like there's still a stigma behind it. Like I'm a medical marijuana patient, and I just have all this trauma, and it helps me become closer to God. And just it's kind of hard to talk about that because it's like so stigmatized. But I literally talk to God, and I like read the Bible like while I'm using cannabis. And
So you want to know
something that's been so helpful
from
What's
Jimmy?
your question for me?
So, like, two things, like, what is the church teaching of it? And then, two, like, if it is something that's permitted, like, I've had priests tell me that it is, how am I supposed to live a life, like, as a Catholic? Because, I go to Mass, like twice a week and, like, confession once a week, dude. Like, this is my whole life,
Okay, well, so the church doesn't have a teaching about medical marijuana, and there's nothing magical about, the THC or the CBD that's in marijuana. They're just chemical substances, and they have different effects on biological systems, including human beings. So the question is, if you're taking medical marijuana or some marijuana derivative like CBD oil, is it giving you a benefit? And does that benefit outweigh any negative consequences that it also has? Because typically when you introduce a chemical into your body, it has both positive and negative consequences, depending in particular on the dosage you receive. I mean, water is a good thing. Water, H2O, is a chemical that is necessary for human life. But if you drink too much water, it's going to raise your blood pressure. And if you drink even more water, you're going to get water toxicity and can die. So you have to look at the situation of what is the chemical doing, and do the benefits outweigh the detriments? In the case of medical marijuana, if you have post-traumatic stress disorder or anxiety disorders that it will address, then it's potentially legitimate to use, which is why it's legal in various places. You also want to say, well, is there another solution that might be better? Or is it going to have long-term consequences that would outweigh the effects it's having right now? So you need to do it in an informed way. But if the best solution is to use it, at least for now, then there's nothing immoral about that. Now, if you're using it too much so that you lose your moral faculties and start committing mortal sins, then you have achieved what Aquinas would call a state of perfect intoxication. And perfect intoxication, knowingly and deliberately entering a state where you just lose your moral faculties, that would be a mortal sin. And that wouldn't be legitimate. But if you're using any chemical in a moderate way that provides benefits that outweigh the detriments, then that's morally legitimate in principle. So if you've been prescribed its use, and it's genuinely having benefits for you that outweigh the detriments, then I wouldn't worry about it beyond that. I would monitor the situation, make sure you're using it responsibly, and periodically do a check to see, is there something else that I should use that's come along now that would be even better for me? But it wouldn't be immoral in principle to use it to actually treat a condition like this.
Anonymous, thank you very, very much for the call. Thank you for your service to our country. And I'm very sorry to hear about the trauma. I hope you'll call again sometime. Oh, Jimmy, you were going to say something?
I want to ask the listeners to pray for Anonymous and everyone in similar situations.
We got to go for a quick break. We'll be right back with more Open Forum with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers Monthly Giving Club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Is relativism dead? It sure seems dead. Each day, new moral demands are made, and they are presented to us as absolutes. Everything, from transgender ideology to physician-assisted suicide, is presented as a moral good that all right-thinking people must accept. But Catholic Answers' own Carlo Broussard says look deeper, and you will see today's moralism is just relativism dressed up in new clothes. Carlo's eye-opening book.
This is Dr. David Anders. Are your friends or family discouraging you from becoming Catholic?
We can help on Call to Communion tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern.
Now, back to Catholic Answers Live.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest this hour. It's Open Forum. Tomorrow, Rose Sweet's going to be here. So that'll be fun. We haven't talked to Rose too much this summer. You can call with your questions. Right now, if you've got a question, you're welcome to call. And any question is welcome because it's Open Forum. And Jimmy Akin's the guest. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. I'm going to Chris in North Carolina now, watching on YouTube. Chris, thank you for your call. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. In Luke chapter 17, verses 22 through 37, was Jesus talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, or was he talking about the second coming?
Well, so you just cited a passage that's rather lengthy, and normally I like to make sure we read passages so that listeners know what we're talking about. But this one is quite lengthy. I don't think I can read 15 verses here, but it is, as you say, Luke 17, verses 22 to 37. And this is a passage where, just to sample a few highlights from it, Jesus says that, at just like lightning flashes, lights up the sky from one end to the other, so will the Son of Man be in his day. He's going to be crucified and stuff first, but then when the days of the Son of Man come, people are going to be eating and drinking and getting married, just like they were back in Noah's days, but then the flood came and destroyed them all, and he compares it also to the days of Lot. And he says, on that day, let him who is on the housetop with his goods in the house not come down to take any of them away. And likewise, let him who is in the field not turn back. Remember Lot's wife, because, she got turned into a pillar of salt. I tell you, in that night, there will be two men in one bed. One will be taken and the other left. There will be two women grinding together. One will be taken and the other left. And they said to him, where, Lord? And he said to them, where the body is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Now, this, just reading it, you could think, okay, this could be the second coming, but it could be something else, like the destruction of Jerusalem. And I would put it in the latter category. I think there are various lines of evidence that suggest that we're talking about the fall of Jerusalem here, not the second coming. And I say that for a few reasons. One of them is, if you look at Matthew's gospel, one of the things Matthew does is he takes material that is scattered in different places in Luke and groups it together. He organizes it. Matthew is an organizer. And he organizes material that is in different places in Luke into these big speeches that Jesus gives, like the Sermon on the Mount, that gathers together material that you find in different places elsewhere. And the same thing is true of what's known as the Olivet Discourse, which Jesus gives on the Mount of Olives. He takes Mark 13, which is all about the destruction of the temple, and that's also the same as what you find in Luke 21. That discourse is all about the destruction of the temple. And in Matthew 24 and 25, he gathers all this temple material destruction together. And then in chapter 25, he skips to the end of the world. And there's a shift in the literary style. In Matthew 24, it's much more descriptive. But when we hit Matthew 25, all of a sudden it's parables, like the sheep and the goats and the wise and foolish virgins and stuff like that. And the way it looks to me is, okay, the material that has parallels in Mark 13 and in Luke 21 is all about the destruction of the temple, and that's basically chapter 24 of Matthew. Then, when we get to chapter 25 of Matthew, we jump to the later stage of prophecy about the actual second coming. So, in pulling together the material that he does to form his version of the Olivet Discourse, where does Matthew put this passage from Luke 17? He puts it in chapter 24. So it's grouped in Matthew with the material that pertains to the destruction of the temple. So if Matthew has understood this passage correctly, and being inspired, one would assume that he has, I would say it looks like this passage should be understood as about the destruction of the temple. There's there's several reasons. The general reason that I would say that that's the best interpretation is there are clues within the text of Luke 17 itself that point in that direction. For example, when Jesus is talking about what to do in this situation, he says there's going to be this terrible thing that's going to destroy a bunch of people. And if you're on your roof, don't go down into your house to get your goods, just flee. Okay, get out of Dodge, because you need to escape this great terrible disaster that's coming. Well, if that's the second coming, running is not going to help you. But if the terrible disaster is Romans invading your land, running will help you. You need to get out before the Romans have you completely surrounded. So don't bother going and getting your goods. Just run. And that's amplified in Matthew's version, where it's like, let those who are in Judea flee. At least that's in either Matthew or Mark. So I think that is one indicator that he's talking about the destruction of the temple, which will be preceded by a devastating Roman invasion. There's also another one, just to mention off the top of my head, which is the final line where they ask him, where is this going to happen? And he says, where the body is, the eagles will be gathered. And the eagles were what Romans had as their standards. They were kind of totems that represented the different Roman forces. Each, like Roman legion, would have an eagle that they would have up on a stick, a big pole with an eagle statue on top of it. And the eagle statue was like their mascot. It represented their military might and how it led them to victory. And so it was their banner. And they would rally around their eagle statue and fight their opponents. And so it looks like Jesus here is saying, well, wherever you see the eagles, that's where the destruction is going to happen. And so that's another clue that he's talking about the Roman army. And the eagles are actually kind of interesting. At one point during the reign of Augustus, this was, if I recall correctly, about AD 10, the Roman military forces were in Germany in a place called the Teutoburg Forest. And they fought a big battle with the Germanic tribes known as the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. Modern archaeology has dug up some of the remnants of that battle. But it was the Roman forces were headed by a general named Quintilius Varus. And during the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, the Romans got slaughtered. The Germanic tribes, they had scouts that were working for the Romans who then betrayed them and led them into an ambush, and the Romans just got slaughtered. And the Germans captured 3 of their eagles. And this was like a humiliating defeat for the Romans, not just to lose the battle, but to have their banners captured. And at least according to some reports, and I don't know how accurate these are, but according to some reports, Augustus would roam around the imperial palace back in Rome shouting, "Quintilius Varus, where are my eagles?" And they eventually got the eagles back. It took 30, 40 years to get them all back. But by the reign of the Emperor Claudius, they actually recovered the 3 eagles, some of which the Germans had put in temples to the German Hercules, meaning Thor. And by the reign of Claudius, they got all the eagles back. But that goes to show you just how associated eagles were with the Roman army as one of its symbols in the 1st century. And that supports the idea that when Jesus is saying where the eagles are, that's where the destruction is going to be, that's where the bodies are going to be, he's talking about destruction by the Roman army.
Chris, I'm going to leave that there so we can take our break. I hope that was helpful for you. That was a wonderful question. We appreciate it. There's lots more questions to come. Open Forum with Jimmy Akin continues on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
One of the biggest mistakes a Christian can make is to try to do good without God's help. St. Therese said, when we trust only ourselves and not God, our soul becomes incapable of virtue. Her remedy? Works of charity. And the greatest work of charity is to share the gospel. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we encourage you to share the gospel with someone who doesn't know Jesus. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
He was a doctor of the church, a Carmelite, and one of the most famous mystics of all time.
Matthew Bunson and the Doctors of the Church.
St. John of the Cross wanted to help all Christians to become saints. One of his most important teachings was to encourage us all to learn how to love. Where there is no love, he said, put love, and you will find love. He died in 1591.
To find out more about the Doctors of the Church, visit EWTN.com and click on Catholicism.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's open forum this hour. Jerry's up next in St. Louis, Missouri, listening on 1380 AM. Jerry, thank you for the call. Go ahead, please, with your question for Jimmy Akin.
Hi. Yes, I've been really upset, and it's got me just very, very angry with the church because the defrocking of Father Frank Pavone, because all the investigative things I've done, I haven't found anything. I've heard a little statement of something that he did something sexual in his office or something. I haven't read anything about that, and usually that comes out against a priest before he's defrocked. This came out way later, and I haven't heard any evidence against it. I just think there's a liberal bastion of cardinals in our American church and throughout the world that does not want this to be the number one issue, which it should be. And I am just
Jerry,
besides myself.
Yep, I get it. But do you want just a comment from Jimmy on Father Pavone, or do you have a specific question?
Yeah, what's his position about it? And he
Okay.
says couldn't control me on this.
Okay,
And
Jimmy,
that-
let's get. Do you have a position you'd like to share, Jimmy?
Well, I have not. I've met Father Frank Pavone, but I don't know him personally, and so I can't really comment on what he might or might not do in private because I don't know him, and I don't comment on things I don't know about. What I do know about, which is the way Jerry's question was represented by the call screener, is why was Father Frank Pavone laicized, and that is a question I could at least comment on because the Dicastery for Clergy gave a couple of reasons why he was laicized, neither of which mentioned abortion. One was blasphemous communications on social media, and it's not 100% clear what that could mean. Obviously, I've seen speculation about what it could mean. One is that, Father Frank apparently said Mass on a temporary altar, and this was it wasn't a permanent altar, so there was a question of should it be classified as just a table or an altar, but he apparently said Mass on what was effectively a temporary altar with a body of an aborted baby on the altar, and he published photos of this on social media, and some might regard that as a blasphemous act. Also, he said very harsh things about various politicians and perhaps other figures, and some of them might have been regarded as blasphemous. I don't know what exactly they were referring to, but that was the claim: blasphemous communications on social media. The other claim was persistent refusal to obey his legitimate bishop. And his bishop published a letter in which he said, it was a letter he had sent to Father Pavone sometime previously, he'd sent to Father Pavone privately saying, I can't work with you anymore. You're persistently disobeying my orders, and here are some of the orders you've disobeyed. And so those were the two factors that were cited by the Dicastery for Clergy in terms of why he was laicized. Okay, so that's a question I can answer. I can at least say, here's what they claimed. What I can't do is go beyond that because I'm not privy to the private details of this situation. I only know what's been reported, and I don't know Father Frank personally, and so I can't pass judgment on his character one way or another. And so consequently, I don't really have a position on Father Pavone because I don't know him personally, and I haven't investigated the details of this case, which would be required for me to form an opinion. So if I don't know about something, I don't form an opinion about it. And I would urge Jerry to, if he's interested in this subject, to continue to research it and to research it from multiple perspectives. It's very easy for humans to fall into what's known as confirmation bias, where you have a certain impression, and your impression may have elements of truth in it, but it also, it may have elements in it that are mistaken. And you may reject evidence that wouldn't fit your preferred narrative, and you may accept something just because it satisfies, a narrative that you do like, oh, there's these, Father Frank is just being persecuted because he's pro-abortion, and there are liberals who don't want that to be an important issue. Well, okay, there are liberals who are pro-abortion, and that's certainly true among various people out there in the world, including some Catholics. I don't know any Catholic leaders like cardinals who are pro-abortion, but I do know that there are some who have varying opinions on how much prominence this issue should be given. And so there's an element of truth there. But that doesn't mean that that's why he was laicized. It may be easy to spin that narrative, but it also may not be factually accurate that that's why. And so we need to, rather than just go with our preferred narrative, we need to be neutral, and we need to look at matters objectively from multiple perspectives if we're going to form an opinion, and see where the evidence points. It may point to an option that is consistent with our prior beliefs and with our preferred narratives, but it also could point somewhere else. And we need to be aware of that, because not everything that you are told is always true. Some people spin things in a way that favor themselves. In fact, virtually everyone spins things in a way that favors themselves at one time or another. That would be true as part of human nature. It would be true of Father Frank. It would be true of Father Frank's bishop. It would be true of the dicastery for bishops. That's just a human tendency. So if you really want to get to the bottom of something, you got to look at it objectively without giving priority to what we would prefer to be true, but actually taking a neutral, hard look at what the evidence and where it is and where it points.
Jerry, thank you very, very much. I do hope that was helpful for you. Thank you very, very much for the call. Just a little bit of time left and several folks still on the line, so off we go to Maryland. Daniel is in Maryland watching on YouTube. Daniel, go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hey guys, thank you for taking my call. I overheard a claim from Protestant against the Deuterocanonicals that was saying that Pope Gregory the Great, I think it was, rejected the Book of Maccabees as canon. Like he recognized it, but he said it wasn't canon or something. I don't know if that's actually true or not, or if that's just a misrepresentation, but I was just kind of wondering.
Okay. All right.
Kind of wondering what? I'm not sure what the question is.
Oh, yeah. So I was just kind of wondering if that was true, that he rejected it as canon, or if that was kind of just kind of trying to paint the Deuterocanonical books in a bad light.
Well, it might be true. It's been a while since I looked up Gregory's beliefs in particular. There were varying opinions in the early church about the precise boundaries of the canon. And it would be a mistake for Catholics to insist that everybody in the early church was agreed that the Deuterocanonicals, including the two books of Maccabees, belonged in the canon. It would be equally a mistake for Protestants to make it sound like nobody in the early church believed that the Deuterocanonical books, including 1st and 2nd Maccabees, belong in the canon. Those are both misrepresentations. The truth is in the middle, as it frequently is. There were people in the early church who accepted the Deuterocanonicals, including these books, as canonical, and there were people who did not accept the Deuterocanonicals as being canonical. And competent scholars, like the Protestant scholar J.N.D. Kelly, acknowledged that the people who believed that they were canonical, they were the majority. That's why they did end up being included in the canon when the church ruled on this issue. Now, initially, it gave a series of local rulings at various councils in Rome and in North Africa that were not infallible. And so even after those councils, there were lone individuals who had different opinions. But the majority opinion going forward and even before those local councils, was that these books are canonical. And eventually, when push came to shove, after the Protestant movement started and started challenging their canonicity, the church said, okay, there's a big movement questioning their canonicity now. We need to settle this infallibly. And so they infallibly defined what had been the majority position all along. That doesn't mean you can't find individuals who had other positions, and having other positions prior to the infallible definition was permitted. So it may be the case that, like I said, I'd have to go back and check that Gregory didn't accept these books. He might have accepted other books besides Second Maccabees that were deuterocanonical. He might have accepted Sirach or Tobit or whatever. I'd have to check on that too. But even if he didn't, okay, it's the opinion of one pope who wasn't teaching infallibly during a period when it was legitimate to have a diversity of opinions on this question. So I don't see it as being a huge big deal.
Daniel, again, lots of folks still on the line, so I will try to get everybody on here with Jimmy if I can. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for the question. I'm going to a different Daniel. Daniel in Waco, Texas, listening on Red Sea Catholic Radio. Glad to have you here, Daniel. Go ahead with your question for Jimmy.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I've been listening to a number of podcasts recently with a couple of exorcist priests, and they had said something that I've heard a number of times, and I guess I've always just taken it for granted, that the demons, that Satan and the demons cannot hear your thoughts, that they're good judges of character and body language and all that, but they can't hear your thoughts. Only God can hear your thoughts. And so I was thinking about that, and in regards to prayers to Our Lady and to the saints, it made me think, well, if only God can hear our thoughts, is interior prayer appropriate when we're making prayers to Our Lady or to the saints? Or is that only appropriate when it's to a member of the Trinity?
Okay, Jimmy.
Okay, so the report that you heard is a common theological opinion historically. It is not a matter of church teaching. So essentially, this is a speculative opinion that demons cannot hear our thoughts. The way that medievals, including Thomas Aquinas, looked at this was they reasoned correctly. Okay, demons, they don't have ears, and they don't have physical voices. That's not part of their nature. They may be able to assume those by taking temporary human form, but it's not their nature. By nature, they're created intellects. So if angels are going to have communication with each other, it's going to have to be telepathic. It's going to be mind-to-mind contact. And so they would believe in a kind of telepathy where one angel can reveal its mind to another angel. But they were aware of a verse in the Bible that says, who can know the heart of man but God alone? And they reasoned from that, only God really knows our inner thoughts. And they therefore concluded, okay, so the telepathy that demons have must be active telepathy, where you have to actively reveal your mind to another angel for that angel to know about it. But I think that's a bad inference. I think that when Scripture is talking about who knows the heart but God alone, it's not talking about angels. It's talking about people here on earth. Nobody but God can see, no human on earth can have unfettered access to your inner thoughts. And I think that's all the verse is saying. And I think that's all it requires us to say. So I think angels could have passive telepathy. Also, there's some evidence from parapsychology that humans have both active and passive telepathy. Having said that, what about mental prayer, which is what you asked principally about? Well, even if the classic theory is true, that only active telepathy exists, well, if you're praying to God, you're making your mind known actively to God, and he'd know it anyway because he has passive telepathy too. He's omniscient. And then God has the information. And so the way theologians classically explained how the saints become aware of our prayers is God tells them. God's aware of our prayers, and if a piece of information is relevant to a saint, let's say it's Saint Bernard, God will say, hey, Saint Bernard, Jimmy Akin is asking for your intercession. Here's what he wants you to pray for. And so you would let God know the information, and God would let the saint know the information. And so God would kind of serve like a router, heavenly router of prayers.
Daniel, I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for the question. Sorry for the folks that we didn't get to, but we do our best. Jimmy Akin has been our guest. Jimmy, thanks. I really enjoyed the 2 hours. Well, I've spent 4 hours with you today, but these 2 were very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, tomorrow, Rose Sweet will be here, so join us then. What else we got tomorrow, Darren? We got Rose Sweet. We know that. We'll figure it out. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.